There was a body under my bed, and nobody believed me. I was 12 years old when it happened. While cataloging my coin collection, an obsession of mine back then, my favorite silver dollar rolled under the bed. Without hesitation, I reached underneath to grab it. That's when I felt her hand. At 12, the only hands I'd ever touched were my mom's and dad's when I was much younger. But this one was unmistakable. Cold, lifeless, and alien to me in every way. I jerked my hand back and scrambled into the corner of the room, my heart pounding like a war drum. As my breathing slowed, I forced myself to crawl back on all fours and lower my face to the floor, even though every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. Then I saw them, those eyes. The most unnerving, electric blue eyes I'd ever encountered, piercing me through the darkness like a predator locking onto its prey. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the carpet, my parents' faces swimming above me. Their voices were distant at first, but gradually came into focus. "Calm down, Ethan!" my mother said sharply, while my older sister, Megan, smirked and commented about my theatrical fainting spell. Apparently, I had screamed so loud that Megan had rushed to my room only to find me sprawled unconscious on the floor. As reality crept back in, so did the memory of that hand, and those eyes. "There's a body under my bed!" I exclaimed. But my parents didn't believe me, of course. They chalked it up to a nightmare or overactive imagination. My dad, a no-nonsense sort of man named Richard, scowled at me. My mother, Karen, softened her tone but was firm. "Ethan, honey, it's nothing. You were just dreaming." But I refused to let it go. I pleaded, begged, and insisted until they relented. I huddled on the living room couch while they went to check, my fists clenched and heart racing. I braced myself for the scream I knew my mother would let loose when she saw the body. But no scream came. Instead, I cracked my eyes open to find my parents standing in front of me, irritation plastered on their faces. My dad's voice was gruff. "There's nothing under there, Ethan. Stop this nonsense." They didn't understand. They wouldn't listen. I started to doubt myself. Maybe it really was a dream. That night, I reluctantly crept back into my room, my father's withering glare silencing any protest. My room looked normal. Felt normal. Even smelled normal. Exhausted from the day's events, I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed, though sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was a cruel torment. In my dreams I saw her face. Those blue eyes haunted me, staring from every stranger I passed. The people in my dreams moved like molasses, their hands clawing at me as they whispered something unintelligible yet pleading. When I finally woke, bathed in cold sweat, the first hints of dawn were hours away. My skin prickled with unease. I had to check again. With trembling hands, I reached for the flashlight in my bedside drawer, my fingers fumbling until I finally gripped it. Taking a deep breath, I slid off the bed onto the floor. My heart thundered in my ears as I aimed the flashlight beam under the bed. And there she was. This time, I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just stared, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Her body was battered and twisted in unnatural angles, her face frozen in a mask of terror. Blood streaked her pale skin, and those cursed blue eyes. They stared at me, accusing me of something I couldn't understand. She didn't move, didn't blink. She was utterly lifeless, yet she radiated menace. I crawled back into bed, tears streaming down my face as I clutched the sheets over my head. I didn't sleep, I cried. Quietly. Desperately. "Why me?" I whispered into the void, hoping someone or something had an answer. Morning couldn't come soon enough. When it did, I shuffled into the kitchen, still dazed and puffy-eyed. My mom, busy at the stove, greeted me without turning around. Megan sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. I hadn't said a word before my dad's voice cut through the air like a whip. "What the hell happened to your face?" My mother turned, gasping at my swollen eyelids. Megan snorted. "You look like someone dragged you out of a dumpster, Ethan." That earned her a sharp glare from my dad, though I doubted she cared. Without thinking, I blurted out, "It was the woman under my bed." My dad's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his face a mask of fury. "Enough!" he barked, silencing the room. "This prank stops now, or there will be consequences. Do I make myself clear?" I knew better than to argue. In our house, Richard's word was law. I clamped my mouth shut and stared at my plate, ignoring Megan's smug grin. But if my dad thought that was the end of it, he was sorely mistaken. School was a different battlefield, and I had no intention of keeping quiet. Joey, my best friend and partner in crime, believed me without question. That's the thing about Joey, he lived for the macabre. "She's gotta be some kind of ghost," he said, rubbing his imaginary beard with an air of authority. Joey had been obsessed with the paranormal since kindergarten, and his enthusiasm for the subject made him the de facto expert in my eyes. "But I touched her hand," I argued, my voice trembling at the memory. Joey waved off my concern. "Not all ghosts are Casper-like, you know. Some of them are more solid. Depends on how strong they are or how pissed off they are." Joey's explanation didn't exactly bring comfort, but it was miles better than thinking I was losing my mind. After some back and forth, mostly Joey rambling and me nodding, he concluded that she was probably a lost soul, stuck in this world for reasons beyond our comprehension. Why she appeared to me specifically? No clue. I wasn't special. My biggest life challenges were acing boss battles in video games and figuring out how to avoid my dad's wrath when I messed up chores. But somehow, I was the lucky recipient of this ghost's attention. Helping her? That was a problem. Did I need a priest or a Ouija board? Both sounded insane. Plus, my dad, Richard, the reigning tyrant of the household, would laugh in my face at the mere suggestion. And laugh would be the best-case scenario. By the time I got home from school, the silence of the house loomed like a thick fog. My parents were still at work, and my sister Megan wouldn't be back until cheerleading practice wrapped up. Usually, I'd grab a snack and watch cartoons for half an hour before hitting my homework. But today, I had a mission. I stood at the foot of my bed, adrenaline pumping, psyching myself up for the inevitable. "Come on, Ethan. You can do this," I muttered. I counted down from 10, then dropped to the floor, flashlight in hand. The moment I saw her, every ounce of courage drained from me. She was still there, her body twisted in that grotesque, impossible way. But now her skin was worse. It had turned gray and sagged in places like it was sliding off her bones. Other parts of her flesh were stretched taut over her skeletal frame, giving her a horrifyingly gaunt look. Her face was the worst, her features distorted by death and decay, but those blue eyes, they were the same. Cold, dead, and filled with some silent plea I couldn't understand. Then the smell hit me. It was a sickly sweet stench of rotting meat, unlike anything I'd ever encountered. I clapped a hand over my mouth and bolted to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before vomiting up my lunch. When Megan got home later, I'd managed to clean up the mess but not much else. She wasted no time pointing out the undone chores. "You know Dad's gonna lose it, right?" she said, crossing her arms. And I knew she was right. I just couldn't step foot back in that room. The stench was unbearable, seeping out from under the door no matter how tightly I shut it. I explained everything to Megan, the decaying flesh, the smell, the worsening horror of the ghost under my bed. Megan sighed, annoyance etched into her face. "All right, Ethan, let's get this over with. I'm proving there's nothing there." Before I could stop her, she marched toward my door. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted to block her. "Don't! Please, Megan, you don't understand," I begged, tears streaming down my face. She hesitated, the irritation in her eyes softening into something resembling concern. Without a word, she turned and walked away. That night, when my parents finally came home, I knew I was in for it. Dad was the first through the door, his steely gaze locking onto mine within seconds. I tried to get ahead of his anger, blurting out everything in a rush, the decaying skin, the overwhelming smell, and those piercing blue eyes. But Richard wasn't the kind of man who entertained nonsense. With a snarl, he grabbed my arm and dragged me to my bedroom. His muttered curses were barely audible, but I caught phrases like, waste of time, and idiotic brat. Classic Dad. With one hand still gripping me, he yanked my bedroom door open and marched inside. In a fit of fury, he flipped the bed up against the wall with one arm like it weighed nothing. Look! He barked, his voice shaking the walls. There's nothing under here! But there she was, her decaying form staring back at me even as my dad's rage blinded him to the truth. The smell made me gag, but I bit it back as tears blurred my vision. How could he not see her? How could he not smell her? My father shoved his face inches from mine, his teeth clenched in a venomous growl. If you keep up this prank, Ethan, there'll be a body under that bed. Yours. The rest of the evening passed in silence, like it always did after one of Dad's explosions. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. We'd all learned to tiptoe around him when he was like this. My dad wasn't just strict, he was cruel, a tyrant in every sense of the word. And while the ghost terrified me, my father's wrath was a whole other level of horror. That night I didn't sleep. The smell from under my bed was suffocating, thick and nauseating, and the sound of my own quiet sobbing was all I could hear. I'd cry until exhaustion pulled me under, only to wake again moments later from nightmares of those blue, unblinking eyes. And the cycle repeated, sweat, tears, and dread until dawn. Unfortunately, this was my new normal, tossing, turning, gagging, and crying through the night, followed by dragging myself through the day in a haze of exhaustion. My sleeplessness didn't go unnoticed. My mother's worried glances grew more frequent, but any mention of my struggles would surely ignite my father's fury, so the household remained silent. The corpse under my bed continued to decay, each check-in revealing more grotesque changes. Her withering body mirrored how I felt, like I was slowly wasting away, too. A small part of me dared to hope she might eventually disintegrate entirely, leaving nothing behind. But the nights brought no relief. My nightmares grew sharper, more vivid. I saw her running through the woods, her chest heaving with panic as she dodged low-hanging branches and brambles. She kept glancing back, terror etched into her face. Whatever was chasing her wasn't visible, but its presence was palpable. It was the same kind of fear I'd seen in my mother's eyes during my father's worst rages, a fear of the inevitable, of something you can't escape. As the dreams continued, her fate became horrifyingly clear. Eventually, her pursuer caught her, and what happened next was so grotesque that I still struggled to put it into words. Even in the haze of sleep, I knew it wasn't just a nightmare. These were memories. Her memories. And she was showing them to me for a reason I couldn't yet understand. I started scouring local news sites, hoping to find a missing person who matched her description, but every search turned up nothing. I felt helpless, trapped in this endless loop of terror and exhaustion. My mom seemed to sense something was wrong, but one glance from my father silenced any attempts she might have made to help me. Still, she had her ways. Late at night, when Dad was asleep, she would sneak me small meals, defying his orders to withhold food as punishment. She saved me in more ways than one. One sunny afternoon, the ordeal ended as abruptly as it began. When I finally mustered the courage to check under my bed again, she was gone. In her place were mundane items, a water bottle, a pair of socks, and a baseball mitt. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. Despite everything, I had come to care for her. I didn't need proof to believe she was real, nor to know that what she endured was horrifyingly real. I prayed, for the first time in my life, that she had found peace. But as the day went on, my relief gave way to a gnawing anxiety. I couldn't explain it, but something felt unfinished. That unease lingered until the lunch period at school, when my principal, Mr. Cash, came to retrieve me. He offered no explanation as he escorted me to his office. My mind raced, wondering what trouble I might have gotten into, but the moment I saw my sister Jill sitting there, her face pale and tear-streaked, I knew the trouble wasn't mine. Mr. Cash's usually cheerful demeanor was gone, replaced by a grim seriousness. "There's been an incident," he said quietly. "Your aunt is on her way to pick you up." Jill immediately broke into sobs. I sat frozen, confusion and dread tightening in my chest. Why wasn't Mom or Dad coming? Were they hurt? Had Dad hurt Mom? Mr. Cash placed a firm hand on my shoulder before leaving the room. It's going to be okay, he murmured, though his expression betrayed the lie. By the time our aunt arrived, the silence was unbearable. She confirmed that our parents weren't physically hurt but said only that something had happened, and we'd be staying with her for a while. Our barrage of questions was met with vague reassurances and the same refrain. Your mom will explain everything. When we arrived at our aunt's house, we found our mother sitting on the couch, her face pale and puffy from crying. She opened her arms, and Jill and I collapsed into her embrace. I didn't need words to know something terrible had happened, but I still clung to her like a lifeline. Finally, she began to speak, her voice trembling. Your father did a very, very bad thing, she said, gripping our hands tightly. He won't be coming home anytime soon. Maybe ever. She explained, sparing us the most gruesome details, that he had killed a woman while on one of his so-called work trips. The police had linked him to not only her but 2 other victims through DNA evidence. That night, when the house was finally quiet, I snuck into the living room and turned on the news. My heart stopped when her face appeared on the screen. Anna Elizabeth Collins. She was 19, just a few years older than Jill. The anchor described how she'd fallen in with a rough crowd and often hitched rides to get around. Her body had been found in the woods, and eyewitness accounts described a man matching my father's description as the last person seen with her. Seeing her senior portrait, her blue eyes vibrant and full of life, I felt both an immense sadness and a strange sense of peace. She was free now. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. I dreamed of Anna, but not the decaying specter I had known. She appeared as she had in her photographs, radiant, serene, and at peace. She glided toward me, her aura filling the room with warmth. She placed her hands on my shoulders and pulled me into a gentle embrace. I woke knowing life would never be the same for my family. But for the first time, I felt that we could survive this, that I could survive this. And though Anna's story ended in tragedy, her visit left me with a strange, bittersweet gift, the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, there can be light.